he often discusses politics and what's going on in Lansing, Washington, D.C. He has his fingers on the pulse of all of this. And we are lucky to have him here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kyle Melly.
Sorry. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. All right, well, we're going to get started on our forum here in just a second. I just want to just lay out the ground rules here. We do have some questions that we want to take from the audience. And so if you have a question tonight, look for Nick Bogie. Nick, where are you at? Over here. All right, there's Nick and Kenny. Where's Kenny? Oh, Kenny's in the back there. So if you have a question and you want to fill out a little card, just try and flag Nick or Kenny, and they can get those to me eventually. What time do we want to start this?
Around 9 o'clock.
All right. So let's get started with this. And Lieutenant Governor Brian Calley, why don't you give a couple minutes of opening thoughts, and then we'll start with the questions.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Kyle, for being here, and thank you also to Senator Colbeck for being here. We have come.
You always have to do that, don't you?
Yeah. Let's just talk this way. Would that be okay?
Here you go.
We have come so far in the last 7.5 years. And having added 540,000 new private sector jobs and hitting a 17-year low in unemployment, we're now a top 10 state in income growth in Michigan. Our kids are moving back. Did you know that before, when we started, we were dead last, not just in the Midwest, but in all of America, in terms of outbound migration of college grads. Not only is that turned around, we're number one in the Midwest 3 years in a row on inbound migration of college grads. That's how much things have changed here. We balance the budget. We do that now as a matter of commonplace. 7 balanced budgets in a row. It's about to be 8. 4 months early is the new on time. We've reduced the debt of the state of Michigan by $23 billion. That's with a B. $23 billion. I see Kenny Hartwick over there, and that matters to people like Kenny because, well, there'll be another decade or so, and he's going to have the keys to public policy and across the landscape here. And he won't be burdened with the debt in the inaction of Republican leadership today. It's been an honor to serve as your Lieutenant Governor, especially to be here in Ionia County, my home, and in this place where I sort of learned to golf, although, and I can shoot about an 80 on the front nine. And but my excuse is somebody's got to stay back and do the work, right? So that's my role. But ultimately, as we move forward here, the question is, how do we build on this strong foundation and create a better future, take Michigan to the next level? It's about making sure if you want to have a good outcome, you have to have a good beginning. That means having the best pre-K through 12 system anywhere in the country. It means bringing back skilled trades. It means social service reform where we don't just help people survive where they're at a place of dependence, but we help them in ways to solve the root cause of the problem and get them back on their feet to independence. It's defeating the opioid addiction epidemic and fixing our roads and lowering the cost of auto insurance and bringing civility back to public policy. I mean, these are the things that our people care about. They're not Republican issues or Democrat issues, right? They're Michigander issues. So I'm running for governor to continue the comeback that we started, to bring Michigan to the next level and make it the most prosperous state in America. It's been an honor to serve for you over the course of the last several years, and I'll look forward to your support, and I would ask for your support for governor.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Governor. State Senator Colbeck.
All right, shall I see if the mic works here without the... Hey, I think I got the magic mic. All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here tonight. Thank you for all the folks taking care of that awesome meal here. Much appreciated. Thank you for all the organizers. And I want to highlight, this is your hometown, Brian. He's been a pure gentleman throughout this whole campaign, and it really is appreciated because that doesn't happen a heck of a lot in politics. And when he's talking about the tenor of discussions, he's been walking the walk on this, so I appreciate that. And Kyle, I think this is our third debate that you've moderated. You moderated another debate with the Lieutenant Governor and another candidate out in Troy. And also, still remember that debate that we had around roads. So I actually challenged all my colleagues to debate if they thought that we need to increase taxes to go off and fix roads. And Kyle moderated that debate. So what we're going to be talking about today and on the rest of the campaign trail is about solutions. And I don't know how much you guys know about my background. I'm actually an aerospace engineer. I work for Boeing on the International Space Station. I was responsible for the life support system. And I'm happy to say people are still living up there, so it actually works. And I used to teach at space camp. That was my fun job, if you will. I actually went to school at a school called the International Space University, where I studied life sciences. And one of my instructors was actually somebody you guys may recognize. His name was Buzz Aldrin. Oh. And so I had a pretty exciting career in aerospace, went over, worked for the Department of Defense, and worked on advanced training simulation systems for all the branches of the armed services. And I worked for a Marine Corps major who was the best darn leader I ever worked for in my life. The guy simply was one of those guys who would give you enough rope to hang yourself, but enough direction to make sure that you're headed in the right direction. And I appreciate that style of leadership, and that's the type of leadership I plan on bringing here into the governor's office. I think it's really important that we lead with bold colors as we go into this next election. Every election cycle, we go into 8 years Republican governor, 8 years Democrat governor, 8 years Republican governor, 8 years Democrat governor. Guess which cycle we're on right now? We can't afford to do politics as usual when we're addressing that. It's important to lead with bold colors. And I talk a lot about principled solutions. Engineers love to fix things. Give me the more complex problem you have, and that's what I try to dig into. So it's like fixing the roads without increasing taxes, free market healthcare solutions. I'm actually nationally recognized for my solutions on that. Going off and fixing no fault, and going off and fixing our education system by eliminating Common Core. But not forgetting the basics, making sure that we protect the sanctity of life, making sure that we protect our... So you're going to hear a lot about principles because I've actually led with principles my whole career in the Michigan Senate, been recognized consistently as the most conservative senator there, and been recognized by a lot of folks for endorsements because of that, like Ted Cruz, because I am not afraid to speak truth to power. So looking forward to the discussion tonight. It's going to be great fun, a great time.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Colbeck, you did find yourself in the center of a little bit of controversy this week. Yeah, I know it. I don't know how this happens, but sometimes you find yourself in the middle of this. Somebody had a video recording of you making some comments connecting another gubernatorial candidate, Abdul Al-Said, to a what we would call the civilization or the civilized jihad, something that was put up.
No.
It's not. That was put in this memorandum that was written by a Muslim extremist. Now, you've gotten attacked by Democrats, but also the Republican Party chastised you for, quote, peddling conspiracy theories. And I wanted to see if you would give the crowd a couple minutes here to explain if you've gone back and tried to look at that a little bit to see if you verified the facts, or where do you think things are, where folks may be misconstruing your comments?
Oh, well, first and foremost, I stand by all my statements. Nobody has ever debated the accuracy or validity of what I actually said on it, and we'll go into the detail of that. But just to frame this argument, because there's been a lot of, frankly, false media on this particular topic. People saying I said things that I didn't say, and it's led to a lot of animosity, frankly, that's exposing the fact that, you know, if you're not taking flack, you're not over the target. And George Orwell probably put it best, that in times of universal deceit, the act of actually telling the truth, even about a sensitive subject, is seen as a revolutionary act. And that's what's happening here. So all these comments spurred from a discussion we had where it was called the See Something, Say Something series. I was speaking with a former Department of Homeland Security counterterrorism expert by the name of Dr. Phil Haney, and also a former member of the Muslim Brotherhood, Kamal Salim. And what we were talking about is this explanatory memorandum that was discovered back in 2004 by an alert Maryland Port Authority police officer who found somebody taking pictures of the supports of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. And he went off and did some investigation, found out that the gentleman who was driving the car had an outstanding arrest warrant for funneling funds to Hamas. And so what they did is they executed a search warrant with the FBI, and in the basement of this house, they found a sub-basement that had a series of 80 banker boxes full of documents that turned out to be the archives of the Muslim Brotherhood. And so what we were talking about at this forum was walking through a document called the Explanatory Memorandum, which is essentially the Muslim Brotherhood's plan for what they call, not me, civilization jihad, which is the deliberate undermining of the West, America here, from within. So you've got the folks that strap on bombs to themselves and go into crowded places. That's their radical jihad side. There's another quieter one called civilization jihad that's aiming to take over specific areas of our society, politics, education, law enforcement, all the way across the board. This is their plan. This is not my plan, not me interjecting what they said. This is not conspiracy theory. It is a matter of evidentiary fact. That document was actually entered into a federal court case called the Holy Land Foundation versus the United States. And I want to make it clear, everybody is making this an anti-Muslim controversy. You know, just like when I had protests with the Westboro Baptist Church, I had problems with them going off and protesting military funerals. That's not an indictment of all Christians. Same way, when I go off and say that if you're affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood who seeks to undermine our way of life from within, that's not an indictment against all Muslims. That's an indictment against folks that actually adhere to that Muslim Brotherhood ideology. And the fact is, I called it out, and I talked about it, and I gave tangible examples of where that is actually being executed here in the state. And I'm not going to be silent about that, and I'm not going to be apologetic. I will be kind. We want all Muslims to go off and appreciate where we live. Folks that know me, I'm a solid Christian. I believe that we should love all of our neighbors as ourselves. But that doesn't mean I should be silent when I see somebody trying to undermine our system of government. I took an oath to support the Constitution.
Member Brian Calley, you've been under some pressure from the Democratic side to condemn Senator Colbeck. Share with the audience here where you are on his thoughts and the direction he's going here.
Well, this was actually my first opportunity to hear Senator Colbeck explain in his own words what he was talking about. You know, it's interesting that our system in government, there's constantly these calls for everybody's got to condemn everybody else, and it all comes down to people getting really upset about words. And words are important, right? But you know what I'm more concerned about? Are actions. I'm more concerned about actions. I'm concerned about having a potential nominee of the Republican Party that has hired under civil service staff 4 campaign operatives. Right? I'm concerned about that. That doesn't represent our values or who we are. I'm concerned about a potential nominee of the Republican Party that has used the criminal justice system, exploited the criminal justice system, and abused his power in order to advance political interests. And we're Republicans, we're above that type of behavior. So I get it when people get upset about words, but I think that we ought to be much more upset about actions that put Republican leadership in our state at risk.
Thank you, Senator Member. Now, folks in this room may know that tomorrow the President of the United States is coming to Macomb County as opposed to doing the annual shindig with the Capitol Press Corps in Washington, D.C. Lieutenant Governor Brian Calley, one of the Republican gubernatorial candidates, has said that he will be there to greet Trump. Would you be there to greet Trump tomorrow?
Well, I had accepted an invitation to speak to a Chamber of Commerce at their big annual dinner tomorrow night, and I'm not going to break that commitment. I am very glad that the President is showing so much attention to Michigan. I will look forward to working directly with him, constructively, on the future after I become governor, and all the time up until then. And I'm also proud to have the support of Governor Snyder. When you consider how far our state has come and the example that we are for what needs to happen in Washington, D.C. They need to balance their budget. What do we do here? We balance the budget. By the way, to break the tie to do that. Major tax reform at the federal level. We needed to do that here. We did that here first. I also had to break the tie to do that. We are now a great example for the rest of the nation, and I'm so thankful to see on some of these issues that the feds are starting to move forward, but we have a lot of work to do. And so I don't look backward much, right? I don't hold grudges. And I look forward to working with President Trump as your next governor.
All right. Senator Patrick Colbeck, will you be in Macomb County tomorrow to see President Trump?
I'm going to be up in Sheboygan, and so for some reason the president didn't check my schedule before he decided to come out to Washington Township. So we're going to have a lot of friends out there to greet him, and it seems like the only time the Attorney General actually goes off to appear and support the president is when the president's here or the vice president. I'm actually one of those guys that's been out with the grassroots. I mean, this is about defending the president. The president, just like me, finds his way to finds himself into a little bit of trouble every once in a while, where folks are attacking him for doing exactly what he said he would do in the campaign, which is why we elected him, right? And so I think it's important that when he's out there, even when the president's not here, we should be out there defending him in public, rallying the base, making sure people understand that, no, he is our president, we're going to support him, and make sure that he understands that there are people in our state that whether or not he comes here or not, we have his back. And I think that's very important. I actually helped with the Trump transition team. He probably doesn't know this, but I actually identified all these free market healthcare advocates up in the Department of Health and Human Services, because we wanted to make sure that I didn't run into these troubles that I've been having dealing with things like Medicaid and all the rules and regulations, all the things that they say we can't do. I was actually working to make sure that we had a good team in place that would actually be amenable to some of the reforms we need to do. So I'm happy he's coming here. The fact that he's coming to Washington Township as opposed to Washington, D.C., I think says it all.
All right. Thank you, Senator. Let's hit some of the issues and some of the cards that you all have turned in here. Senator Colbeck, where do you feel we are right now on the issue of Common Core? Do we have a system of Common Core in the Department of Education in relation to testing our students? And what do you think that you should do as governor to dial that back, if so?
Yes, we do have a system of Common Core at the Department of Ed. But one thing that we don't have is the Smarter Balance Assessment. And because of efforts that I led actually to block the development of the Smarter Balance Assessment, which if we would have actually had that in place, the federal government would have been defining what test questions we had on our exams here in Michigan. So that's why I stopped that. If you look at education, it's kind of a 5-layer cake. You got the standards bone connected to the assessment bone, connected to the curriculum, connected to lesson plans and course materials down below. Well, if you can control that assessment, and through my actions, we actually retained that control of a statewide assessment on it. Now we can actually control what's downstream. If we would have gone forward with the Smarter Balance as proposed, we would have been stuck listening to whatever the feds have. So I've actually led legislation to repeal Common Core. I've actually taken a penalty from my Senate Majority Leader because of my opposition to Common Core standards. That was one of the reasons he cited for me not getting a chairmanship as a returning state senator, despite kicking butt as a budget chair for the state police and Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. We turned around the operation of both of those organizations, but there's penalties for taking principled stands. And that's what you'll get with me as governor, is making sure that my first priority is what I told you I would go off and do.
All right, thank you, Senator. Lieutenant Governor, do you believe that what we have in place right now in the Department of Education is Common Core?
The Common Core assessment is in place right now, and that's a problem, and it needs to be repealed. But as you have to be careful that you don't just replace it with another one-size-fits-all type of a standard. Our kids are not standard. I've got 3 kids. Julie and I have 3 kids. They're 8 and 11 and 13, and they're radically different one from another. Right? What they need in order to be successful in life is different, even though they're growing up in the same house with the same parents. Right? Our kids are not standard, and yet our system continuously wants to treat them or build a system that assumes that they are. And so getting rid of Common Core is important. We have to make sure that we don't just put in another system that treats our kids like they're standard as well. But I think to advance education over the long term, we need to support our teachers. We need to support the heck out of our teachers. I mean, this is the type of challenges that show up in classrooms today are so different than how teachers were prepared to teach. Right? And there's the latest and greatest in research and best practices in the way that you help kids overcome non-educational barriers to learning. This is really important. If we want to advance education, you mold around what the kids need as opposed to expecting the kids to somehow conform to the artificial constructions of government.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. We're going to keep with you here. This is a question from the audience, and I'm quoting, "You and Attorney General Bill Schuette seem to occupy the same political space, while Senator Colbeck is the outsider conservative. What makes you different from Schuette, and why should we vote for you?"
I've been part of the comeback of Michigan. Whether it was major tax reform or balancing the budget or a 2,000 net reduction of 2,000 rules and regulations in our state, 540,000 new private sector jobs and a 17-year low in unemployment. Balanced budgets is a matter of standard practice. And we had a long time when there were smoke and mirrors to balance the budget in our state. It was stability and growth, turning around the population trends, and keeping more of our young people. Did you know our growth rate in 25 to 34-year-olds in Michigan is now 10th best in the nation after being worst before? And we have come so far. That's my record. And I'm the candidate that is running to continue that comeback, to bring it to the next level, that treats the work that we've done not as something that needs to be undone, but something that should be built upon, like it's a foundation. Building on that foundation. That's what I bring to the table. That's what makes me unique in this race. I mean, we can go down issue by issue by issue, but ultimately, a contrast that I would share with you is the way that you dress or the way that you behave in the course of a crisis. During the Flint water crisis, even though the Lieutenant Governor is not part of the emergency manager chain of command, I moved my office there to work shoulder to shoulder on the ground on the future, not just on infrastructure, but on nutrition and education and healthcare and economic development, all things that that city needed to move forward, things that that city had needed for a long time. But it's the idea of looking forward and working with people on the future as opposed to looking backward and politicizing and casting blame and pointing fingers. And somebody has to be about the future. And that's the biggest difference between he and I.
Senator Colbeck, you've done a lot of listening to the Lieutenant Governor and been involved in this race, obviously, from the get-go. Do you see some discernible differences between the Lieutenant Governor and Bill Schuette?
Well, I'm not going to get into comparing the different candidates, but I will compare this candidate against the other candidates, and I will submit that the governor and lieutenant governor have provided a very good, steady leadership team to go off and help with our economic recovery. But a lot of the central point or the pivot point for our economic recovery, frankly, I would submit is due to the passage of right to work. And I was the one who led that effort in the Michigan Senate, once again against my Senate Majority Leader's wishes at the time. And that's what happened when he had bold leadership. And I did this because rank and file workers needed their freedom of assembly back, but I also did the analysis on where all of our jobs are going. And by a 3-to-1 margin, people were leaving our state to go to right-to-work states. By passing that, if you actually look at the employment figures, you can see the little hockey stick curve that starts in 2012 in the wake of passing right-to-work. That's when things started turning around. So I think a lot of the economic recovery we were having, I mean, we got some fiscal discipline, but if you really want to knock it out of the park and separate us from being a perennial bottom dweller in employment figures here in the state of Michigan, you got to look at some disruptors like getting back that fundamental First Amendment freedom of assembly for our rank and file workers as kind of the pivotal moment for our economic recovery.
All right, thank you very much. One of the big issues that we've been seeing in the polls is the roads. A majority, not a majority, but a plurality of folks have ranked the condition of our roads our #1 issue. Senator Colbeck, the legislature in 2015 had approved a package that was going to inject $1.2 billion into their roads through $600 million of new revenue and $600 million of general fund. Do you believe that's enough? And if not, what would you do to do something different to correct the condition of our roads?
First of all, I think it's plenty. Second of all, before that ever happened, remember we had a $2 billion tax increase, proposal 15-1. Remember what the voters said to that? 81% of us said no. And what happened right after? Within 2 months, there was a proposal come out of the Senate for this $1.2 billion plan, where we'd increase $600 million. And one of the principles that I'm running on is the fact that the government works for us, not the other way around. This is a stellar case of the government not listening to the people. And so what I've done is identified ways to focus in on road quality. And as an engineer, I look at total life cycle costs. I don't look at just how much money is in the kitty. I actually look at the expense side of the general ledger as well. And the fact of the matter is, if you actually convert all of our version 1 lousy roads to version 2 longer lasting roads on the order of 3 times, 4 times the life that we have in the current roads, you actually need to spend less money on road maintenance than we do right now. So you got to convert them from the version 1 to version 2, so there's an initial transition phase. But once you get done with it, and this is why I'm against the tax increase on it, because once we increase the taxes, we never seem to go down again.
Yeah, right.
And so it's about time to go off and find ways to make Lansing make ends meet in the budget rather than pushing all those responsibilities back on our kitchen tables.
All right, thank you, Senator. Lieutenant Governor, that $1.2 billion that was approved in 2015, was it enough? And if not, what else can we do to fix these roads?
It's not always just about revenue. First of all, the $1.2 billion, you talk about raising standards in roads, you have to understand that we have more 40-year-old roads than any other state in the country. Right? I don't care how good the standards are in your repairs. If the road itself, the entire road needs to be replaced, then those repairs aren't going to hold up. The higher standards that we put in place, they count when you replace the road. And that's what needs to happen in so many cases. And so when that's what the $1.2 billion, as that rolls into place, the sooner the better. We've accelerated it, increased it more this year in terms of how fast that previously approved amount goes into place. So the $1.2 billion is one thing. We've got to replace a bunch of roads, more roads here than any other state in the nation. Replace them at higher standards. But it's more than that. We have to continue to pay down the debt. The Granholm administration took out $2.3 billion in road debt. So the first $225 million you pay in road taxes, they don't go toward fixing today's roads. They pay off the Granholm loans to fix roads from 10 or 15 years ago. And so we have to maintain the discipline of paying off the debt. That'll be another over $200 million a year into roads, and it's integrated asset management. It's where we expect every single entity that shares the right-of-way to coordinate their repair and maintenance and replacement. So you don't fix the road, right, and then have the city come by the next year and replace the water and sewer lines. They got to tear up the road and do that, and then a utility company decides to bury their lines. They tear up the road and do that. It's the idea of expecting, and we're piloting this right now, and we'll take it statewide, and we think it could reduce costs by 15 or 20%. By expecting every entity that shares the right-of-way to coordinate their repair, maintenance, and replacement. It's like when you place the pavement on your driveway, when they're paving the road by your house, and it's a lot cheaper because the equipment and materials are already there. It's like taking that concept statewide and sharing the cost between all those different entities. You do all of these things, and we're engineering projects different today too. I could give you another example if you had more time about how we took a $400 million project and reduced it down to $100 million. But we're trying to make up for 40 years of bad management of our roads. So there's a ton of work yet to do. But with $1.2 billion, it's already passed and approved, with integrated asset management, by paying off the debt so that all the road taxes go to this year's roads instead of yesterday's roads. And by the way, the federal government has been reducing the funding that comes to the state at the same time as well. So even though we've been putting more of our general fund dollars into roads, the amount coming from Washington has been going down. We have to get all of those things right, and it will not require a tax increase.
All right, thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Sticking with you here, Republicans were elected in 2010, and since then the state budget continues to grow. We are now at $55 billion. Why is this happening, and why aren't we shrinking the size of government?
Well, coming out of the lost decade, there was a lot of shrinkage in state government, and we did make a lot of substantial reductions in spending, cuts in spending. And in fact, when that very first budget came up in 2011, the first budget of our administration, it required very substantial cuts from across the board. And even though we had a supermajority of Republicans in the Senate, I still had to break the tie in order to make that happen. Now, there are a lot of different places in state government where funding or revenue streams come from, but I just want to make, and some of them are up and some of them are not up. right? In terms of the general fund is not, it's about the same as it was, I think, about 20 years ago, but the school aid fund is a lot bigger than it was before. Where the Constitution says where the revenue streams go and what they get spent on. And so as we move forward from here, I just want people to keep in mind, right, we paid down the debt by $23 billion, reforms and pay downs. We've reduced the debt by $23 billion. But there's still $40 billion left in debt. And I don't want to see us just say for the short-term benefit to our kids, hey kids, sorry, we didn't think it was a high enough priority to pay off the debt. So I just want to see us remain faithful to the plan that we have in place. It's like paying on a mortgage. Like right now, the state of Michigan has a payment schedule to make us debt-free. We have to stay on that. And if we do stay on that, the amount that we'd be able to cut taxes would go up by billions of dollars. Right now we argue about amounts that are much smaller than that. Imagine if we were a debt-free Michigan and we didn't have pension obligations and road debt obligations to make. These huge reductions in taxes compared to anything that is on the table right now. So I just would implore, we've cut taxes more than this administration, the Snyder administration has cut taxes more than, so I'm proud of our record of cutting taxes. But I want to make sure that as we cut taxes, we do it the same way that we did it in 2011, which is to cut the spending at the same time that you cut the taxes, so that we don't heap more debt on our kids.
All right, Senator Colbeck, having watched the budget since 2010, I can see that the budget seems to continue to go up. We are at $55 billion. Has the governor and his team not done enough to try and cut the size of government?
No, and I appreciate everything that the Lieutenant Governor said, but the fact of the matter is, when we passed that proposal 15-1, or the legislature passed it, and I opposed it, that was about a $1.7 billion tax increase in year one. And it was pitched as something to solve the roads, right? Guess how much went to the roads the first year? $400 million. So clearly, it was a little bit of a bait and switch. Well, then it didn't stop there. Remember when we passed that $1.2 billion roads plan, we had $600 million in new taxes, $600 million in reprioritized funds. As soon as that was passed, without a vote of the people this time, not with my vote, $400 million of general fund revenue was actually transferred from the transportation budget and actually used to backfill potholes and other budget priorities like Medicaid expansion. Which leads me to one of the biggest problems we had with that expansion of the budget was the passage of Medicaid expansion, otherwise known as Healthy Michigan. We've been promised that that's going to actually save money, but I'm here to tell you, according to Senate Fiscal Agency, their analysis that was done, it's actually going to be losing us money in 2020, which invokes an automatic repeal provision on Medicaid expansion and Healthy Michigan, just so you guys know. So the issue is we have to start focusing on the expenses. So if somebody wants to go off and look at a program to expand access to health care, stop looking at ways just to throw more money at it. Look at ways to lower the cost of health care for everybody so that we can expand access to care. That's the approach I took, and that's the approach I'll take to solving all of our problems up in state government. Focus on the expense side of the ledger first, and then if all else fails, then you can start looking at tax increases.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Senator. I just got a card here from the audience that we should do a clarification on the budget. $55 billion budget. The general fund, though, is $10 billion. The general fund is really the revenue that the legislature and the governor have to really kind of play around with, and that $10 billion really hasn't moved much in the last few years. This is a good question from the audience. I really like this one. Is there a current or former Supreme Court justice that is an example of the type of justice you would appoint if given the opportunity as governor? Senator Colbeck, you first.
Well, judicial system is not always my forte as an engineer. I usually deal with laws of physics rather than, some of the stuff we talk about as a legislator. But Antonin Scalia, for me, is the gold standard. And his opinions across the board are obviously something that's kind of a conservative bellwether. He realized that the purpose of the Supreme Court was not to go off and make laws. The purpose of the Supreme Court was to go off and adjudicate specific decisions in that context. And it's a rare breed. There's a lot of these lawmakers that go up to the Supreme Court and think that they're just a unelected legislator, that they get to go off and make all these laws. I'm sorry, but Article 1, Section 1 of our U.S. Constitution is very clear. Congress has all legislative authority. That's it. They don't share it with the Supreme Court. So we need a justice that recognizes that to the T.
Is there anyone on the current Michigan Supreme Court that you think is embellic of that, or kind of encompasses that?
Well, I like a lot of the folks on the Supreme Court that we have right now. Joan Larson, when she was on there, frankly, I loved her. She was a former U of M law professor, and the idea of getting a conservative U of M professor out of U of M, frankly, that alone qualified her for any office she wanted to go off and hold. So she was my gold standard, and she was really good.
All right. Lieutenant Governor, is there a current or former Supreme Court justice that is the example of the type of justice you would appoint if given the opportunity?
The current Michigan Supreme Court is actually, the majority of the members were appointed by Rick Snyder, or at least as they originally took office. From the very first one, Brian Zara, all the way through to the most recent, Beth Clement, I would stand by and endorse and hold up every single one of them that we've appointed as a gold standard in rule of law judicial nominations. They really have been outstanding. Our Supreme Court in Michigan is much better. This isn't just like I'm proud of Michigan because I'm from Michigan, but our Supreme Court here in Michigan really is better than the other Supreme Courts around the country. I mean, it really is outstanding in most every way. The way that it operates, the efficiency at which it operates, the rules that it imposes for the process of law and the judicial system in Michigan, to the decisions that they make, the quality of the decisions, the detail of the decisions, the way they adhere to the law, even when it's hard, even when they don't agree maybe personally with what the law says. We have an outstanding Supreme Court. And if you want to know the type of justices I'd pick in the future, I've been a very active part of the decision-making process in appointing judges in the past, and we'll carry that forward.
All right, we're going to stick with you, Lieutenant Governor. And this is a question about lessons learned. Obviously, we've had some challenges in this administration. You mentioned the Flint water crisis earlier, but the VA hospital in Grand Rapids, the UIA software, and the phony fraud charges that people were stuck with. Are there lessons learned that, and you only got a couple minutes to answer this, but in general, are there lessons learned from these challenges?
You always have to commit yourself to learning lessons. I mean, even when things go right, how could you have done it better? When things go wrong, certainly, how can you make the future, how can you make sure it never happens again, and to make the system better in the future? And that was really important, particularly in Flint. And I worked so much in Flint in 2016 that I completed a Flint City income tax return. Literally, it was my place of work. I moved my office there, and I worked on the ground with people. Here's a couple lessons as I've talked to people around the country and especially around our state about what happened there. A couple of lessons I think people ought to really take to heart, particularly if you represent other people. Right? When people say that they have a problem, then your default position should be to believe them. Even when there are experts that say, no, they don't have a problem or they don't understand. And maybe the problem is a misunderstanding, right? But you have to be committed to continuing the conversation and digging deeper and asking more questions. When people think they have a problem, do I just default as believing them and don't go to the scientists and ask whether or not they have a problem, right? That's part of the evidence that you gather, but it's not the decision. The second is to make sure that with these technical positions that you don't accept technical jargon and compliance speak as answers to questions that require plain answers. And that's one of the things that's been so frustrating about seeing everything that happened before was how many of the right questions that were asked, but the way that the bureaucracy answered back the technical answers, it was incomplete. So if you were to ask, hey, is the water safe in your city? And somebody comes back and says, the water meets the federal standards of parts per billion per the current lead and copper rule. That kind of sounds like a yes, but it's not really a yes, right? It's a technical compliance answer. What is the confidence in the way the samples were drawn? What are the trends? Does it meet standards today, but it's trending in the wrong way? Do you have confidence in the procedures? You know, is the federal standard right in the first place? These are all questions that need to be asked. And there's a lot of reliance. In our society, we seem to give so much over to so-called experts. The problem is that when you think in compliance mindset, sometimes that misses the main point. And that was definitely the case in Flint. So to recap, the two things that I ask people to do is to really default on believing people, and then don't accept answers that are technical compliance speak when it deserves a plain answer.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Governor. Senator Colbeck, what do you think were the lessons that were learned in Flint and UIA and the Grand Rapids Veterans Home?
Well, I think the Lieutenant Governor hit a lot of those key points, frankly. And it's a case when you have a mining canary in the mine and you got an issue with what happens with that mining canary, you got to listen to it and respect it early on. I think part of it also is when you assume the responsibilities of emergency manager, you're essentially assuming the responsibility of being the mayor for that city, and you got to be very hands-on, and it's tough. I mean, and because of all the other duties that are going on with state government, and that's something you got to be concerned with. But there's a lesson learned that goes beyond that, I think, and it gets into how we engage people in public debates with a lot of folks. Early on, we took on a lot of contentious issues, particularly around education. And there's a lot of folks out there that I had some very interesting office hours with people early on during that discussion. And a lot of these folks were very belligerent. They were very disrespectful. They were very, I would say, closed-minded. And I got in this mode where it's like, that gets a little tiring after a while. I'd rather just go off and focus on going off and solving the problems. And I kind of disengaged early on. After that, I said, this is getting a little frustrating. You're not even listening. You can't give up. And that's the biggest lesson learned. You got to keep re-engaging. Because what happened was when we disengaged with some of those same people that were very vocal early on, it just left an opening for the Democrats to come in here and use some of our schools as essentially campaign grounds for them. And that's something that I think is a big no-no, because they're doing stuff without any oversight whatsoever, using state resources for campaign purposes. And now we're seeing some of that stuff manifest in what they're doing with these protests and these marches out in D.C. They actually are using the kids as tools, and it's because we kind of left home base and forgot to go off and engage in that environment.
Thank you, Senator. With all of these forums, there are so many questions that you guys come up with, all of them very, very good questions I wish we could get to. I just got the card that we got one more question, and then we're going to do closing statements. I was really struck by this one, Senator, because I haven't heard your answer to this or the Lieutenant Governor's. Who is your greatest, who is your greatest influence and why?
Well, my greatest influence, bar none, is Jesus Christ. And this is something that early on in my life, I was not always in the Bible. Now I'm more likely not to take a shower than I am to not read the Bible in the morning. And I did take a shower today, so don't worry about that, everybody. But really, it's changed my life. Every morning I start off in Scripture. And so I've got a devotion. Today, actually, was so timely. It was talking about, from Proverbs 11:9, it was saying that those who go off and, there's a lot of people that seek to go off and destroy people. And there's a lot of mean people out there, but you know what? The righteous escape with knowledge. And so, case in point was what was going on with all this hubbub with Dr. Abdul al-Sayed. And the fact is, I know what the facts of the case are. And if it wasn't for that influence and that, God recalibrating me every single morning, because His Word is new every single day. And one thing about this job, sometimes it gets very, very frustrating, but I say the one good thing that's come out of this whole job is that my faith has deepened more than ever before. I'm ready to take on mountains like Caleb on a regular basis. I fully embrace 2 Timothy 1:7, where God didn't give us a spirit of timidity, but one of power, love, and self-control. And that makes all the difference, and that's why why I'm willing to take on bold challenges like Right to Work.
Very good. Thank you, Senator. Lieutenant Governor, who is your greatest influence and why?
Well, the influence the influence from God, from Jesus in my life has been manifest through the people I've been fortunate enough to have around me, people that have really lived it out and shown me the way. I mean, I haven't always, I've been ever since I was 7 years old a Christian, that's not a straight line, right? Life is not a straight line. And there's been times when I was definitely pulled back. But the difference was there are always people that represented at really important stages in life that represented truth and such a strong example of what to do. When Kara was diagnosed originally with a heart problem, and at first it was like a death sentence, and I didn't know what to do. And there was this pastor, Tad Jameson. He was the interim pastor at our church at that time, and he really challenged me. I said I didn't know how to pray about something like this because I've never had anything go so wrong, and I was so mad. I was so mad about it, and like even hopeless. Most of the time, my prayer life was like, God, I'm so thankful that everything is going so great, and feel free to spend all your time on these other people that need more help. Right? That was my attitude. My attitude toward prayer before. This is the first time it wasn't like that. And Tad said, "Pray like Jesus in the garden." Do you trust God? And I said, I do. I mean, I want to, but maybe I don't. Maybe right now it's failing. Like my faith is failing right now. He said, "Pray like Jesus did in the garden." And I said, not my will but yours, right? Am I going to say this about when my daughter's life is on the line? Am I really going to say this? I said, I can't do that. It would be insincere if I did it. And he said, well, why don't you just do it out of obedience? Just every day have this conversation. And it was amazing what happened. At first it was almost like robotic. It was obedience. But every day there was this conversation. And you know what started happening? My relationship started growing. And then my faith started growing. And it changed everything. I've been so fortunate. I could give you examples where Julie played that role. I could give you examples where my mom played that role. I could give you examples where so many people at critical points in my life brought me back to what is right and what is true. And I'm better for it.
Very good, thank you. Thank you, Tim. That was very powerful. Very powerful. All right, we've got time then for the wrap-up, and I'll just give the mic back to you. If you could, we're pretty, we just flopped over on the time, so if you could limit it to a minute or so.
Well, thank you so much for being here for the leadership of the Ionia County Republican Party. It's always a delight, a pleasure to be back home. I mean, moving forward here in our state, I try to be real plain about it. I've never tried to stand in front of Rick Snyder or use my position to get any kind of attention. Right? This whole idea about trying to seek attention, most of you know me, it's not a natural thing for me. I'd rather just get the work done. We have such an opportunity here in our state to do something remarkable and different. Right? We have built a strong foundation. But if you want to have a good outcome, you have to have a good beginning, so we have to get the education part right. My top priority. And we can't take a one-size-fits-all approach. Right? College is a great path to take, but that's not the only path to take. Right? Skilled trades, information technology, professional trades, so many different areas you can make a great life out of. We have to do all of those things. When we help people, and I do want to help people, I want to help them get back on their feet so they don't need so much help anymore. When somebody becomes addicted, there are no throwaway people, and I take that attitude, an attitude of redemption toward public policy development. Right? Every single person is worth the effort. There are no throwaway people. So it's about helping people get back on track. And a little bit about civility. We're going to have fights in politics. It's going to happen. Right? It's going to happen. But you don't go in promising it. People go, they promise, they put it at the top of their website. They say, vote for me, I'm a fighter. I saw an email the other day, and the header of the email said, I promise. It was a promise. I promise that I will fight every single day. Now, where else in your life does that make sense? Can you think of another place in your life where somebody would come to you and say, I promise that I'll fight every day? And you'd think, oh, good. Somebody comes in for a job interview, would you say, and they say, hire me, I'll come in and fight with everybody. You would never hire that person. Even in this tight labor market, you'd never hire that person. It is so important that we stay focused on getting the work done. That's what I've been about the whole time. I know I'm not the flashiest candidate in the race. I know that I'm not the talking points candidate. I know that I'm not good about putting the veneer and the plastic up for delivering the lines. To me, it's really just about the outcomes and creating the best possible Michigan for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Governor, and Dr. Colbeck, why don't you drive us home here?
All right, thank you. Well, Brian, if you're not about the lines, I'm an engineer, so I don't even know how to spell pithy. But this does go to a point where we have to get beyond the talking points. And it's tough in this forum to get like a minute for the responses and stuff to go into detail, but that's what I like to do. I'm an engineer. I like to dig into the detail. Matter of fact, I say working in state government sometimes is like every morning waking up, opening up the hood of the car, and you find another disconnected wire you got to go off and fix. So that's why I talk a lot about solutions, and I go well beyond the talking points and the bullet points you see on the palm cards. And I've got practical plans to go off and eliminate the state personal income tax, not just ratchet it down 0.3%. And I've identified a milestone-based approach to do that. That's not just a pass one bill, it goes to zero. No, there's actually a series of milestones you go off and achieve. If you do that, it tees it up for another principled solution, and that is a broad-based economic development plan. So instead of the state playing, venture capitalists with your tax dollars, we're actually going to use that $1 billion that we put into the MEDC and Michigan Strategic Fund to actually lower your tax burden, which actually helps out a lot of the small business owners. It's been kind of forgotten sometimes in some of these tax incentives because they're pass-through entities on income tax. We're going to go off and lower the cost of health care by providing higher quality care. I've been not just a state leader on the topic of free market healthcare reform, but I've actually been a national leader recognized in Forbes for my free market solution that actually features something called direct primary care. And I've gone all across the state talking about it. I've actually implemented a pilot now in state government for Medicaid. We can lower 20% of our Medicaid costs, which is $18 billion a year. That's $3.6 billion that can be used towards things like a tax reduction. I believe in energy choice. I don't think the 90% regulated utility market is doing us any good. The 10% have choice are spending up to 20% less on their electricity. I'd like to have 100% of us having that option. We got to get rid of Common Core once and for all. We got to actually get the testing out of the classroom and get back to teaching in the classroom, which means we got to get the feds, we got to get the state out of the classroom and focus it back on teachers and students and parents. There's a lot of principled solutions that are out there. We've got to fix the no-fault system. I've actually got a plan to reduce the no-fault insurance rates, or reduce our insurance rates down by 40%. And there's a stretch goal of trying to find a way to get to 60% that I think is potentially possible. It ain't easy, but it is possible. I like to swing for the fences and swing big. It's all about bold solutions. This election, if we're going to beat the Democrats in the general election and buck that 8-year ping pong match that we've been in, you need bold colors. You're not going to get there with pale pastels. You have to swing for the fences. You got to appeal to the voters directly and talk about fixing things like the roads, things that are a pain point for them, and being practical about it with high integrity. And I believe that I can do that as your next governor. And if you go to colbeckforgovernor.com, you find more information. But I really would appreciate your vote on August 7th and then on November 6th. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. And your chair, Georgia Sharp, is going to come and give some closing remarks. So thank you much, candidates, and Georgia.